So just what's your overall thought on the situation on Maduro's government and the claims of a humanitarian crisis?
Well, there's a lot of factors here. It's worth, first of all, going back a little bit into the history, not deep into the history, but Chavez, Hugo Chavez, came into office in 1999. There was a short period in which the U.S. was kind of testing the waters, seeing if he could be controlled. Pretty soon it was obvious he couldn't be. And in 2002, there was a military coup. We should not forget that. The military coup deposed the president, disbanded parliament, threw out the court, Supreme Court. It was openly supported by the United States. It was lauded by the press as a wonderful step. The coup was overturned in a couple of days by a popular uprising. And pretty remarkably, the people involved in the coup, even the Venezuelan media that supported the coup, were left pretty much untouched. Would that have happened here if there was a military coup? Okay. At that point, the U.S. turned to kind of subversion, sabotage, economic warfare. The political, elite elements are pretty rabid all through Latin America. The class hatred is extreme. They didn't like Chavez's policies, and they didn't like him. He openly flaunts his Afro-Indigenous background. It's not the kind of person the elite elements like. He carried out a variety of programs, could describe them, but the most important evidence about the nature of his programs is how Venezuelans felt about it. That's the important question. Well, we know there's a respected polling agency in Chile, Latino Barometro, takes regular investigations of attitudes and opinions throughout Latin America every year. Throughout the Chavez years, Venezuela ranked right at the top alongside Uruguay in support for the government and support for democracy. That there were regular elections. They were carefully monitored, declared to be free and fair. The Carter system investigated them and others. There was a sharp reduction in poverty. There was more inclusiveness in the educational system, improvements in health. The majority of the population, like all through Latin America, is quite very poor. They were given a kind of a voice and some sort of dignity. Current observers seem to think that there's still, even the Maduro government, which is pretty bad in many ways, there's still strong support for them.
I'm sorry, just how is the Maduro government bad?
Well, after Chavez died, Maduro took over. His economic policies are... Chavez had economic policies that were very poorly executed, and Maduro made them much worse. Terrible policies which really caused the economy to have serious problems. Furthermore, one of the errors that Chavez made was not to try to diversify the economy. It's a colonial economy. The U.S. took over Venezuela around a century ago when oil was found. It had been a British protectorate. The U.S. kicked the British out unceremoniously, took it over, supported it, also dictators, the usual story. But it kept the economy almost entirely reliant on oil. And Chavez didn't change that. The second mistake was the technical one, that during the period of high oil prices, he used the funds for the social programs, for international programs. He was providing cheap oil to poor countries like Haiti. He was even providing cheap oil to poor people in Boston. I don't know if you know that
Right.
story.
Yeah, I do remember that, actually.
But there were no reserves set aside. And, of course, that meant that when the price dropped after his death, the country didn't have reserves to function. So it had to turn to international credit markets, which are dominated by a hostile United States. That made it difficult to proceed under the best of circumstances. And Maduro's government was had terrible economic programs, and it also, as the opposition increased, often violently, responded with considerable repression. So it became a very dangerous situation. Meanwhile, the U.S. instituted sanctions, which are so extreme that even the opposition economists criticize them. They're just strangling the country. The idea is to totally strangle the country. Well, you ask about a humanitarian crisis. It's hard to know. The press is so hostile and has been since the very beginning that it's very hard to determine how reliable the reports are. There are individuals going down who give a very different picture.
Max Blumenthal, I believe, just recently did the Gray
Max
Zone
Blumenthal,
project.
the most recent one is Ken Silverstein, who is a very credible reporter, has a long activist background and experience, and he just has an article, I think, maybe in the Atlantic or somewhere, which gives a much more positive picture also of popular support for even the Maduro government, despite its serious flaws. There were plenty of problems under Chavez. So, for example, there was an enormous amount of corruption. He himself didn't seem to be involved, but he didn't control it or end it. There were human rights abuses, not on the scale of the U.S. dependencies in the region, but serious enough. I was involved in protesting some of them. So it wasn't the idea that it was contrary to the claims on all sides. It was not a socialist government. The rich were left free, enriched themselves, capital was free, wage labor continued. There were reform measures, but nothing like socialism.